I am Andesani Masindi, an MBA student at Sahid Business School, Oxford. I hope you have all had a great time so far. I will be moderating a panel on empowering Africa, navigating challenges, fostering gender equity. I am so excited to be moderating this panel because this topic is very dear to my heart. And that is not just because I'm a woman, but it's because it's a topic that I've been focusing on extensively since I actually got to Oxford. This panel will focus on gender equity and empowerment, aligning with the conference theme, Charting Africa's Path Forward, a Journey of Possibilities. Our speakers will examine the challenges to gender equality in education, employment, leadership, and in business. And they will highlight the innovative strategies, the successful initiatives, and effective policies that have been applied to break down barriers and promote inclusivity. And the aim of this is to ensure that gender equity becomes a part of Africa's progress, and we unlock individual potential, and we prepare ourselves to achieve and capture all the full of opportunities and our potential. So I am excited to introduce our speakers. And the first one, Dr. Ketwe Dlamini. She has already been introduced. And the second one is Nana Otto Oyoti, who is the Executive Director of Forward UK. Nana's work focuses on social justice, promoting gender equality and sexual and reproductive health and rights for women and girls. Our third speaker is Mumbi Ndungu. He's the Executive Director of Powerland Project. Her work focuses on empowering youth, especially young women, with digital skills to make them employment ready, and also driving financial inclusion in sub-Saharan Africa. Thank you. All right. Thank you, ladies, for joining us here today. I have a ton of questions to ask you, but because of the limited time, I'll try and keep it short. And I'm also sure the audience also have a lot of questions to ask you. Please kindly scan the QR code, which will appear shortly here, and submit your questions online. And towards the end of the session, I'll make sure to scan through your questions and direct them to the audience. So first of all, I would like you to briefly introduce yourself, starting with Dr. Ketsiwe, by talking about or elaborating on a critical statistic regarding gender inequality in Africa that strikes a chord with you personally or professionally, and why it is important to you.
Okay. I actually think I've done my work on that front and would like to pass it on.
Hi, my name is Nana Otu Uyote. I'm the Executive Director for Forward, which is an African diaspora women-led organization tackling multiple forms of violence against women and girls. And when you ask me about one statistic, I can't talk about one because I have numerous. And for me, the most important is child marriage rates. If we look at the numbers of girls who are being married early in Africa, they can never become like the Dr. Dlaminis because they wouldn't even have the chance to have the right education, to have the skills. And I always say that they wouldn't even have the knowledge to give that nutrition status to their children. I always give example of myself. When I was 24, I had my first daughter. She had measles when she was 9 months. Everybody gave me advice. I refused to take the advice. All I did was to look in a book called Where There's No Doctor. I don't know whether anybody knows about that. Those were the days. And I just read everything. And from there, today, my daughter has given me 2 grandchildren. She lived. How many girls in Africa who are married early will have children dying over and over again because of lack of knowledge? So for me, child marriage, and Africa has one of the highest rates of child marriage. So if we do not do something about it, we will never get the prosperity that we are talking about. And for me, data, if it's not measured, is not treasured. But at the same time, there's certain data that Africa, we don't value. So it's about also valuing data because we have the data. but not valuing the data of child marriage is really a big challenge. Linked to that is teenage pregnancy. So I wouldn't go further to that. I can talk about it later. But for me, teenage pregnancy is a major statistic. UK, we have 13% of girls. In Africa, we are bordering around 40% of girls who have children before they are 18 years. Why should we burden children with having children before they actually become women and mothers? Thank you.
Over to you, Mumbi.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Mombi Ndongo, as mentioned. I'm an executive director and co-founder of Powerland Project Africa, which is an impact organization working to build capacity in technology across Africa. We are based in Nairobi, Kenya, but have offices across 5 African countries. And our core business is focusing on providing digital skills to young Africans across the continent. So far, we've been able to train about 15,000 young people with digital skills. So we provide scholarships to train software developers across Africa. Out of the 15,000 we'll be able to train, only 23% of those are young women. And this is an extreme passion point for me, focusing on education, especially digital education, technology education, because we all understand now, especially post-COVID, there's nowhere we're going without providing the actual skill set that is required to leapfrog Africa, especially. We were one of the most affected, especially around business. And education. We can see in my country, I don't even think we've already stabilized when it comes to education until now because of the impact of COVID. So what we try to do at Powerland Project is provide ready-to-market skills. So for young people across Africa, so they are able to find solutions to some of these particular gaps. So how we do this, we created an innovative education model where we train software developers in 16 weeks. We provide them with an immersive education program. And after that, we give them 3 pathways that they pursue. One is employment. So we connect them with different organizations across the world where they can get opportunities for work to build their own livelihoods. The second pathway is entrepreneurship. Much as we train as many people as possible, we understand there's a huge challenge when it comes to getting job opportunities. We just heard from the young lady here. So we realize also the solution for this is entrepreneurship. How do we build the next generation of African entrepreneurs who can provide these solutions to employment for their fellow young Africans? And the last one is advanced skilling, because we also realize technology moves really fast. It's extremely dynamic. So how do we position Africa currently as the global talent hub for technology by providing advanced skills, working collaboratively with different partners? For this particular one, we work very actively with organizations such as Microsoft, who provide opportunities for these young people to advance their skills, especially focusing on their cloud, to see how they can advance their skills to the next level, but also they can bring back those skills within especially private and public sector. Our main focus is actually public sector. So how do they work, use these skills, especially to promote e-governance within different countries across the continent? Thank you so much.
All right. Thank you so much for the introduction and for the insights. I think one of the statistics which are quite alarming, as Nana pointed out, around child marriage. And I managed to have a look at the rate of teenage pregnancies in sub-Saharan Africa. And like as she said, the 40%, the rate is quite alarming to think that teenagers from the age of 15 to 19 are pregnant or have already been pregnant. That rate is quite alarming. So back to you, Nana, just to understand, are there any interventions that have been applied in your experience that you think are working to kind of tackle this statistic and address the teenage pregnancy issue? And I would also like the input from Dr. Kesiwe in this regard, bringing in your experience from UN Women and also from your lifelong experience, also contributing into this issue, what you think has worked and has it worked in your space?
I think, thank you very much. I think for me, one of the things I realized was to even look at where we are in this UK. When I came to UK about 20 years ago, teenage pregnancies were quite high. I think there were over 25% of girls were having children before the age of 18. Today, it's gone down to about 12%. It's actually modeled as one of the best practice countries by the World Health Organization. primarily because the government took it as a priority issue. They took it as a public health issue. They took it as an issue that impacted not just girls, but the whole communities. It impacted the country. So there was a strategic approach towards it. And one of the things that they did was there was strategic leadership. Department of Health was very much involved. Department of Education was very much involved. They had access to girls and young women right from early in schools, teaching them sexual and reproductive health information and knowledge. Today, if you look at so many countries in Africa, what we are teaching around sexual and reproductive health information in schools or sexual education is basically very little. And even where there is information, we focus on abstinence only. So we are actually giving girls skills where they cannot even make decisions. We are not even focusing on how to deal with healthy relationships. So here they're dealing with healthy relationships. They're dealing with parents. There's a lot of education, awareness, communication around the issues of early sexual initiation. There is a lot of focus on health providers having understanding of these issues, schools and teachers having an understanding, but also being trained to work with these issues. And I think one of the most important bits that I actually was excited about the UK program was also the use of evidence. And right from today, we've been talking about evidence. Where is the information? Is there change happening? How is it happening? And how is it being monitored? And because of that, they have actually made an effort to really look at those who've been left behind. And I think right from this morning, we've been talking about inclusive education. So if a girl drops out of school, she is given the opportunity to go back to school. I can always remember a case where I had to deal with a young woman from an African country where she had been affected by female genital mutilation, which is an issue of we work with her forward. And I was called by social services to come and discuss the issue. Not only was she pregnant, but she was 16 years. Right from that beginning, the effort was, how can she go back to school? How can she be supported in order for her to return to school? So that having a child at 16 wasn't going to be the end of her education. For a lot of girls in Africa, that's the end of their education. And a lot of schools actually have punitive laws such that you can't even return to school. We have, even in Tanzania, they've been talking about the female president. We still have barriers in girls' re-entry into schools. So the whole issue of re-entry into schools, how many schools are preventing girls? UK has successfully managed to address that. So we have models of good practice. I think in my country, Ghana, they're also trying to trial some of these practices around girls who have dropped out of school, but targeting vulnerable communities, targeting vulnerable girls, those who are at most risk, poor girls in communities, such that they will not drop in school. So school dropout rate is such a big issue in Africa. What's the point in focusing on girls' education when you can't retain them in schools? When these girls can never go to secondary school from primary school, and by JSS, they have dropped out. So I think it's a critical action that if we are looking at the 70% of young people who are in Africa, how many of them are in this category? And how are we going to address these needs such that we don't repeatedly leave girls behind? Because let no girl be left behind should be our mantra in addition to the Ubuntu. How do we bring everybody along? We are not doing that. How do we do it? It's a collective action, but we need strong leadership. And that is the challenge. And I say, if that we have these data, but it's not valued, and so it's not treasured. Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry, actually, I don't need one. Remember, I'm wired. Okay. So teenage pregnancy. It's a challenge even today because parenting has not changed. African parenting has not changed in all these years. I'm working on a project right now that is looking at what works on adolescent girls and young women HIV prevention. And it's very relevant to the topic of teenage pregnancy because the way you get HIV is the same way you get pregnant, right? And one of the things that young people are saying is that this isolation of girls and not trying to include boys in the challenge of pregnancy or HIV infection does not make sense. One young man put it so well. He says, one arm infects the other. So why are you cutting off the other arm? Why are you not talking to boys as well? We do need responsible men and boys. This child marriage, you find that it's a very old man that has married the child. It's not a young man. The teenage pregnancies, yes, some of them are young men, but we need to have men just as responsible for pregnancies as women in our societies. We need positive masculinity. Until the day we can get a man's body to get pregnant, this challenge of teenage pregnancy will be a girl's challenge, but we are a society. A girl does not impregnate herself. You know, some of our customs actually do try and make it not only a man's responsibility, but the families of the man's responsibility. You actually have to come and say you have damaged and pay damages and take some form of responsibility. But we don't practice our culture everywhere. So how is it that we can really focus also on positive masculinity so it becomes a responsibility of two people? There's some policies of ours that don't make sense to young people. One young lady was saying, oh, you know, this age of consent that you are so fixated about as the policy makers, it doesn't make sense to us. When we go to the clinics to get contraceptives, we're told we haven't reached age of consent. And yet we don't need your consent to have sex. So how does this age of consent work exactly? Times have changed. Kids are having sex earlier than you can imagine. You're the last person to know as a parent. You just see the stomach has grown, you know? So we have to also get with the program. Parenting needs to shift and be able to talk to your children about these things. It's a life skill. You know how you choose when you have a child. Now we have solutions. Abstinence does not work anymore. You know, at 6 years old, children have cell phones and they can go into people's bedrooms through the cell phone and see what is being done in a bedroom. Sometimes they don't even know what they're doing because they've seen it. I, for instance, only realized I was being sexually abused when I was about 18, 20. At the time it was happening, I didn't know what sexual abuse was, you know? So because I came from that abstinence type of family, you didn't talk about these things. So I didn't even know that somebody was trying to abuse me until very late in the day. Then it hit me. I had to process it, you know, etc. But to this day, I've never been able to have that discussion with my mom about that abuse, because I just feel she would feel so uncomfortable with it. She had trusted this person with her child, you know, and she had no idea this was going on. I had no idea it was going on myself, because at that time I didn't realize it was sexual abuse. Nobody told me. So yeah, you know, the parents also need to get with the program, I think, in terms of this teenage program, pregnancy, and also we need more positive masculinity.
Nana, you touched on something very critical there about the impact of the consequences of teenage pregnancy, school dropouts, and the policies not allowing the children to go back to school. So I'd like to hear your perspective, Mumbi. You provide education to upskill women to get digital skills to be ready for work. What is your view on providing those kinds of skills to people who have dropped out? Do you think and your view in terms of policy enabling you to provide those services, or are you already providing services to people under those circumstances?
Thank you so much. And I love the slogan that that was mentioned around leaving no girl behind, because that's one of the key criteria that we work with. So we realized one thing when we were designing our program, that the current education systems do not allow for a lot of things. They don't allow for a lot of innovation around them. Even if you look at something as simple as a curriculum for education, especially focusing on something like IT, we all know technology evolves really fast, but you're in school for give or take 4 years, like in my country, university, you're in school for 4 years. By the time you're done with the 4 years, I still need to spend another 6 to 8 months upskilling you for you to become someone that would ideally be of value to me at my workplace. And while we were having these conversations with the different stakeholders, we realized that a lot of interventions are not designed with the stakeholders in mind. So I don't go to sit with the people who I'm actually designing the solutions for, so they don't end up working. So that's what we decided to do in reverse. So one of the key things we do with our program is we understand we have a lot of women, young women, not only young women, but across board, who also want to reskill so they can go back to, or they can explore other job opportunities. And what we realized is whatever program we were running initially was not working, because we'd run it like a classroom. So you'd find that most of them don't have the time to go to class at 7 a.m. because they're caring for their children to go to school. So we redesigned the program to cater specifically for this group of people. And what we realized is in the next cohort that we had a very high percentage of reduced attrition when it came to women in our program. And when we sat with them after that, they also said they also want to go into their different businesses, but they don't feel like they have the support for that. So we created an entrepreneurship program about that particular issue, working together with different banks, such as ABSA, who have a very strong, powerful program around supporting women entrepreneurs. So I believe if the interventions are created with intentionality, they work. Especially around education, especially around supporting women access to finance for the entrepreneurs. So I believe that if interventions are created with the intended, with intentionality, they actually work, just speaking from our own experience. Yeah.
All right, in the interest of time, I'm going to ask one final question before I go through the questions from the audience. So this question is really a call for action. So people sitting here, some of you may have responsibility as leaders, but the question is, as we chart Africa's path forward, what immediate and impactful actions would you advocate for to significantly advance gender equality or gender equity, and who would you want invited to the table? I will start with you.
I think for Africa, and we saw a lot of the statistics, I think maybe intentionally or non-intentionally, we are kind of on the right path. When it comes to public sector, when it comes to the private sector, like we mentioned before, there's a lot of recognition for women in the different professional careers that in these particular spaces. But I think for me, the challenge is I feel like we are extremely segregated. So we need to find a way to align all these exceptional women together from the different multifaceted sectors. I think that's one key thing that we need to do together. In terms of who needs to be in the room, I think as I said before, the people you want to create these solutions for, you need to hear from them first. So as you design the solutions to this, they need to be part of those conversations initially, so that you can make sure whatever solutions we come up with, they're included from the beginning, and they're part of the execution to making it happen as it should be. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you.
I think for me, it's those who have been left behind. And we do need to create spaces to actually understand them or their voices. And we have actually been doing some really interesting work with young women's leaders. And one of the things we've done is even create spaces for young women in communities to have their leadership skills, understand their voice, their experience, but also to know their rights and where to look out for. One of our programs is called Tuizeshe, which is it's about young women's empowering our sisters. And that has been a very useful strategy for us. So creating spaces for leadership development around young women. Partnerships is really, really critical because we can't do this work alone. It's very often you'd see that it's the NGOs who've been left to actually carry the, the burden of improving the situation. We actually need government leadership, and it's a multi-stakeholder approach. So you're not only working with just one ministry, but working, and very often what you'd see is that it's a gender ministry that's actually put in that role to function. It's not enough because they don't have enough resources. They are least resourced when you go to any African country when it comes to gender ministries. So we need education, we need health, we need the economics to actually all come together. So it should be a cross department or cross ministry approach, really engaging civil societies. And I'm sorry, we have a situation of sidelining civil societies in Africa. They are carrying the buck in terms of the challenges and should be very much central to the process. And most importantly for us, I think we need to ensure that there is a lot of data and using data to make decisions, particularly using the voices of those who've been left behind. Thank you.
So really building on what my sisters here have said, I would also like to make sure we have more young people in the rooms where we make decisions, where we try and carve out a new future for ourselves. Senegal, I was so proud of Senegal as a country in terms of having a leader that is under 50. Because the world has changed so much that the old skills will not help us get to the future that we want. So I would like to see more young people involved in decisions and in gender equality. You'll have seen the way our masters of ceremony, they vibe. You know, it's the gender vibe that I think is our present and future. I think the younger crowd get it better than us. You find when they are maybe socializing and drinking, they are able to do it in a mixed group. Give us 5 minutes as the older generation. We've divided ourselves. Men one side, women on the other side, you know, without anyone telling us that's the way we should do it. So I think for me, if there are people I would love to see more involved and challenge us as people with the ranks or opportunities to give them space. Wherever you go, bring a person along. You know, whenever I can't speak at a function, I try and look for young people whom I can bring in to speak in my stead. Because those spaces will catapult them. A lot of them just need one opportunity to be seen. So that really is how I would like to move forward on gender equality. Seeing more youthful people who will live much longer than me, and in many ways, for the future, are wiser than me, come to the fore.
Thank you so much for the closing words. So I'm going to take a few questions from the panel. So the first question is directed to Nana, and this is directed to the lack of data. You mentioned that there's lack of data in Africa when it comes to gender statistics relating to teenage pregnancy and early child marriage. So what is the reason for the lack of relevant data on these pressing issues in Africa, and what can be done to improve this?
The issue of data is challenging. And I think what I had to sort of gather a lot of the data from DHS and also from the demographic health surveys, and also quite a lot of research through the internet. Quite a lot of the data is old, And so you'll find that in terms of using the data for current decision making, some of it is actually not relevant. But even where we have data, that data is not seen as urgent. And I think for me, it's the challenge of how do you utilize data? Now, if a country has 40% of girls all getting married early, and that has implication on safe motherhood, that has implication on child well-being, that has implication on mothers as being the first teachers. Now, if you yourself, you don't have the skills, how do you pass it on to your children? How do you value? And it's evident that where mothers are more educated, they are more interested in prioritizing their children's education. So all these trajectory and things that we need in terms of the social determinants would actually be very good for mothers. So the lack of data, I think there is also a disconnect between the academics in Africa who are collecting research and what is on the ground. And so we do need to have that strategic engagement with academics to actually collect data that's relevant for development. Because academic institutions are seen as the echelon of society in terms of what they say is book long, as we say it in Ghana. And so you value their books, you value their data, but what kind of data are they generating for us to actually use in terms of development? So I think those are some of the things that really need to be done. And while there is data, we also ensure that somebody is responsible for implementing, because without implementing using that evidence-based data, we should always be asking, where is the evidence for making these decisions? And I think without pushing and asking for evidence, we tend to make data based on decisions based on just, flimsy things, and I think we need to really question the use of data in decision making.
All right, so one last question to you, and I would ask that you can respond briefly to this question. It's relating to child marriage and cultural underpinnings. Do you see any correlation to that? And is there anything that is being done to address that, even though it's related to culture?
Again, me. Yes.
Briefly, so I can move to the question.
Marriage clearly is a cultural practice. And what I found is also in some communities where you have female genital mutilation, it's a precursor to child marriage. And so once you go through child FGM, you are ready to get married. It has cultural underpinnings, but there's also social underpinnings. And I love what Dr. Lamine said about social security. For a lot of communities, child marriage is survival. Now, if I can get 16 cows while the girl is 12, 13 years, why do I wait when she's 24? Because the 16 cows are needed now. I need them. Sometimes the men will actually marry again when they get those 16 cows. So it's not necessarily because they really need it, but it's actually having more wives. The reality is we do need to recognize there's social norms that actually underpin some of these things, and the social norms around girls' virginity and making sure that the girl is married early. There is also huge issues around where a girl is pregnant. The family actually insists that she marries the person who violated her. So the perpetrator now becomes her husband. How is that girl ever going to have a good life? So those cultural underpinnings and norms where there's negotiation, and then we have promissory marriages. There's so much that once a child is born, you're preparing her already. The man pays for, giving things here and there so that the family is in the favor. So cultural norms, and sometimes you actually also have to religious norms. And whilst there is no religion that says you should marry early, a lot of people accept it as okay. So we have to look at the mix between social norms as well as cultural and religious norms.
Thank you. Another question to Mumbi. And this is also relevant because we are sitting in a panel, gender equality panel, and the panelists ladies. So the question is, how in what ways have men influenced your journey? And how can we invite more men to be part of this journey with regards to even when it comes to positions, the person heading up a position of diversity, equity, and inclusion is not just a woman, but it's also a man. So this kind of roles which are promoting gender equality are not only just being led by men, but it's also women. Are not only being led by women, but it's also men, and they're also like allies. So how has that worked out in your career, if it did, and how did you leverage that to be where you are today?
All right. So I think for me, I've had a lot of instances where. Sorry. Thank you for the question. For me, I've had very many instances that I've had a lot of support from um, different men. But to be honest, actually, my journey has heavily been influenced by women, just to be honest. But also, the women who have influenced my journey have been very adamant about what we were discussing earlier around not sidelining the men, just believing that you have equal opportunities. And the one constant thing my mentor says is that we're not asking for the level to be reduced for women to get there. We're just asking for the field to be level so we are all playing on the same field. So I believe, and that's a mindset I go with. Much as I've had a lot of experience with support from different women. I've had, of course, a lot of men who've supported my journey. My two partners for Powerland Project, what was setting Powerland Project, are actually men who have been in the technology space for extremely long time. And they are very open to the ideas that I bring on board on how to support the inclusion of women when it comes to training in digital skills. So it's been quite an interesting journey, and I believe as we continue with that same mentality, we'll be able to go far. Thanks.
So a question to Dr. Ketsiwa with regards to nutrition. So the world is changing when it comes to sharing the burden of care in terms of taking care of children. So the question is around how can we share that burden as women focus on other pursuits when it comes to taking care of children's nutrition? And how does that picture look in Africa, especially in rural Africa and in the village, compared to when we look at more developed parts of Africa when it comes to sharing that burden of care?
Okay. I think I'll go back to the point that Nana was talking about culture. You know that culture is something of our own making as human beings, and it's not static. You can actually change culture over time. So, like the example you made, Nana, about negotiating for cows. We still practice the lobola, we call it, where we come from. But now there's different types of incentives embedded. So if I have a degree or a master's, you're a PhD, you're going to pay. You're going to pay lots of cows. So this is now incentivized to promote my education as well as a woman, because the family knows that if they invest in me, or I invest in myself educationally, that will bring. So this is the subtlety of culture. You don't have to throw the baby out with the bath water, but just wake up and smell the coffee, man. There are some of these cultures that are really holding us back, the way we practice them. So I think that really it boils down to how can we bring the best of both worlds, the West and what we have, to progress us further. In terms of the home culture, the household, there is no place that I've seen women exert their power more than in the actual house. Either overtly, they can be very controlling, that everything runs the way they want to, or more subtly, where the man actually believes he made that good decision. So even on the burden of care, you can negotiate as a couple, how you want to share it. Now that we're sharing the spoils of work, we should actually be more conscious about sharing that burden of care domestically, because save from actually the act of birth and the act of breastfeeding, my male partner can do everything that I can when it comes to care. He can look at me with empathy when I'm running around the house and trying to cope with everything and see what he can also do. I don't need to always ask, as well. So these relationships can be negotiated domestically as well to share the burden of care. In the workplace, let's congratulate the woman who has collected her child from school as much as we congratulate the man. Have you seen a man being celebrated because he's collected his child from school? It's his child, for God's sake. Why is it a big celebration? So let's normalize the duality of responsibility when it comes to human beings that will become part of a viable society. So I think individually we can do it. When we are leading organizations, we can start pushing for policies like parental leave instead of paternity and maternity leave. Parental leave also reinforces the fact that we are parents. And now in this modern day and age, the idea of gender being binary is history, So, imagine trying as a same-sex couple to figure out who takes maternity and who takes paternity. Parental leave makes it a conversation of equals who will then decide how is it we're going to take leave so that instead of filling the jails, we are filling the hallways with productive people. That is the result of parenting being neglected. Our jails get filled up, ultimately. And it's our responsibility to bring up human beings that will create viable and progressive society. All of us, male or female. I still want to see an Oxford study on how we could use biological interventions to share the burden of birthing people. We will get there. But until then, we need to be able to share at least parenting.
So this brings us to the end of the session. Thank you very much for your time. Thank you. I had a very great time, so I hope you'll take some of the practical lessons from here and then feel free to engage with the panelists at the end during the lunchtime. Thank you.
Thank you.